Our next speaker is a founding partner at Blend Interactive with over 16 years of web experience, including implementation of systems and intranets. He is a regular speaker on the content management and strategy circuit and writes about various web technologies at Gadgetopia. Please welcome Deane Barker.
As I said, I'm the business development director for Blend Interactive, but by trade, I'm a content management engineer, and I love content management. I have been working in content management since before it had a name, probably somewhere in the late 90s. And for my 40th birthday, my wife bought me my dream car, and I actually almost did this. I had the form. You get a form from the state, and you have to fill this form out, and there's like a section where you have to explain what the license plate you want means to make sure it's not something obscene. And so I started kind of writing down there, and I got to like the second sentence, and I was like, this is ridiculous. And so I actually didn't do this, but I reserve the right to do it. If you ever see this around town, this is me. I love content management so much that I write blog posts about how much I love to manage content. I write blog posts about why I identify as a content management professional. I write content management about the professional practice of content management. For a while, I'm the director of business development now, but for a while, my title at Blend was Content Management Practice Director. Does anyone know what a content management practice director is? It's a guy who loves content management so much he makes up his own job title. That's what it is. My partners came to me. They're like, what is this new job title? I love content management. I just made it up. It's great. Here's the problem, is that I think we're not doing enough with our content. And this is what Karen was just up here talking to you about for an hour. It was a very inspirational talk. This is going to be a much more practical talk. What it's going to be is a look at a case study involving National Public Radio. We're going to talk about a case study, a content management architecture and philosophy they put in place called COPE, C-O-P-E. We're going to talk about what it was and what it is, because it still exists. We're going to talk about the benefits it offers, the challenges it brings. But that's really going to be a lead-in for a conversation we're going to have about what does this mean for us. When we go back to our organizations, when we're done here today, what do we need to do at our organizations to take advantage of the lessons that we can learn from this case study at NPR? But before we get started, we're going to start with an admission, and I'm going to give you a question to chew on. And the admission is that we mistitled this conference, especially last year. Last year, this was the tagline for this title. You have a website, now what? And we distanced ourselves a bit from this tagline this year because it's really a misnomer. It should have been, you have a bunch of content, now what? One of our problems, I think, as content managers, content creators, content editors, is we've equated content with a website. I really have a website. I'm out managing a website. And we perpetuated with this tagline last year, and I think it was a mistake. And we're going to talk about what this means, but the question I want you to chew on before I get into it is this. If you had the most perfect content management system in the world that could publish content effortlessly and perfectly into every possible way you can think of, except a web page, what would that look like? And would that have any use to you? We're going to call this the Garden of Eden content management system. They could eat for any tree in the Garden of Eden except the one tree. And this is it. It can publish content any way you want except as a web page. And would that have any value? So let's talk about COPE. COPE was a project at NPR, National Public Radio. It was spearheaded by two guys, Zach Brand and Daniel Jacobson. Daniel Jacobson has since left for Netflix, but Zach Brand is still at NPR. I actually interviewed Zach Brand for this session. We talked about his experience. And COPE stood for Create Once, Publish Everywhere. When they released it in a programmable web article in October 2009, it kind of hit my industry like a bombshell. Everybody was talking about it. If you go to this blog post, you can see there's just hundreds of comments and trackbacks. Everybody was talking about this. And this is what they said. In order for content providers to take full advantage of these new platforms, this was 2009, remember, so they were 5 years behind the curve, they will need to, first and foremost, embrace one simple philosophy. And that philosophy was COPE. And I think what's really interesting is they called it a philosophy. What's interesting about COPE is it's non-technical. It's not based on any particular technology, any program language, any particular architecture. It's really a philosophy. And they made this other statement that I think is really key. We need to build content management systems, not web publishing tools. Remember what I said about our logo. we tend to equate content with web pages and websites. And they sat down and they said, you know what, we're not going to bind ourselves to the website. We're going to manage content. We're not going to manage websites. So COPE was kind of a big deal in my industry. If you Google Create Once Publish Anywhere, everywhere, NPR, you get about 100,000 results. People were talking about it quite a bit, and this is what it looks like. This is a screen cap from the original presentation that they released. And as you can see, this is an article, the article editing interface for an article about the return of Winnie the Pooh. So Winnie the Pooh is coming back out, and this was an article as it was represented here. And you can see they have a title, and they have a subtitle, and they have a teaser, and they have a mini teaser, and they have some data information. But what's really interesting about this is there's nothing up here that's really web specific. This is managing this article as content. When I talked to Zach on the phone, he said that's what we decided to do. We realized that our core offering wasn't a web page. It was an article. And an article really has no format. So we decided to manage the article as pure content, which is what they were trying to do here. Now, when an editor managed this and hit publish, all sorts of things happened. This is how the article appeared on NPR's website. This is how it appeared in NPR's official iPhone app. This is how it appeared in another iPhone app, and yet another iPhone app. One of these was National Public Radio Addicts, so some of these were like rogue iPhone apps that people had made. This is how it appeared in NPR's internet radio. This is how it appears on NPR's affiliates. Of course, NPR had affiliates all over the country. This is WBOR in Boston. This is how it appeared in iTunes. This is their NPR podcast. This is how it appeared in their iGoogle gadget. So I've shown you, I think, 8 or 9 here. It actually got published 25 or 30 different places around the internet. And the idea was you create it once, you publish it anywhere. And this was an amazing thing that a lot of people were really, really interested in. But when this came out, I remember looking at this and thinking, well, this isn't new, really. This is multi-channel publishing. And we've had multi-channel publishing for years. We're going to talk about channels a lot over the next 45 minutes. A channel is really a distribution point for your content. Your content goes into your CMS. Your content comes out in a channel. And this is what most people have. They have what we call single-channel publishing. They have a CMS. They put their content in there. And they have a website, and that's the channel where it comes out. The idea that NPR was pursuing was something like this. They have their content in their CMS where they manage it once, and they publish it everywhere. And so this was multi-channel publishing, which has been around for a long time. It's the idea of just publishing content in more than one channel. I don't know who was here last year, but our keynote last year was Lisa Welchman. And last fall, I was talking to her about this concept, about multi-channel publishing. And she has an alternate definition, which I think is really apt. Her definition for multi-channel publishing is that thing that everyone said they wanted, but that hardly anyone actually did. And this is very true. Multi-channel publishing is one of those things that plays very well in sales demo, and vendors and architects talk about it, but hardly anyone actually follows through and implements it. It's one of those things that kind of became the great lie of content management. People would ask us, well, do you support multi-channel publishing? We'd say, of course we do. You can do this and that and the other thing. You're not actually going to do it. It's like workflow. Traditionally, workflow is the most over-purchased part of content management. People buy workflow, they talk about workflow, they make sure their system has workflow, they never actually implement workflow. And this is what multi-channel publishing was. Because the fact is, no matter what we said, no matter how much lip service we played to the idea of using our content in more than one channel, we were publishing into the dominant format, which was HTML in a browser. The book came out last year, which was a fantastic book called Content Everywhere. If you're interested in this topic, I highly recommend that book, Content Everywhere. I wrote a sidebar. You'll see my name in chapter 4. And I wrote this, and I absolutely believe in it. We feigned interest in separating content and presentation, but deep down, we knew that press release was only ever going to be published as a web page. This idea of separating content and presentation is a perennial topic in content management. Karen talked about it earlier. I'm going to disagree with Karen in just a second, because separating content from presentation has actually been around for thousands and thousands of years. In 400 BC, Aristotle wrote Rhetoric, and in it, he separated the idea of logos, which was the content of the speech, and lexis, which was the style and the delivery of the speech. I believe Aristotle was the first content manager. And there you go, folks. That's my degree in philosophy right there. Thank you very much. So the idea of separating content and presentation is another way of paying lip service to this idea, is that we want to strip our formatting out of our content because we're going to use our content in other places. I wrote an article. This was 6 months before the COPE article came out. This was April 2009. And in this blog post, I called the industry out. I said that we have gotten too web-centric in content management. We talk about managing content. We're not managing content. We're really managing web pages, and isn't that really a healthy thing to do? You know how much more we could do with our content if we stopped managing it as web pages and websites? I think something happened in the last 5 years, especially it was kind of epicentered around when Cope was announced in fall 2009 that really made this change. And that is the rise of social media. We're getting a little internet history here. Do you know what if we look at the three big platforms, let's call the three big platforms Facebook, Twitter, and LinkedIn. The first one was actually LinkedIn. LinkedIn started in 2003. Little trivia, I was user number 2300 of LinkedIn. If you look up your profile on LinkedIn, there's an ID in the URL. They announced a year ago that's actually sequential. That's your membership number. I was user 2300. Facebook started in 2004, and Twitter was started in 2005. So let's give these platforms 2 to 4 years to gather ground and gather users and reach some level of critical mass. In 2007, 2008, social media was a very big deal. I got on Facebook in 2007. Around 2008, companies were thinking, wow, we have to start having Facebook pages. We have to start having Twitter. We need to get on LinkedIn. So suddenly, it wasn't just our website anymore. We had presences in all these social media platforms. And then it was a very, very short leap to think, well, we need to put our content on these things. We have these news articles, these press releases. We need to get them onto these social media platforms. And so what were we doing? We didn't have really any other choice, so we were copying and pasting. We were publishing press releases to our own website, and then we were copying and pasting these into LinkedIn and Facebook and Twitter. We were doing all this stuff, and it was a lot of work. So this was 2000, 2007, 2008. 2009 comes around. We legitimately have a multi-channel publishing problem. So when Cope came around in 2009, it was kind of a big deal because people were looking at that, and they were saying, yes, that's my problem. This is what we wanted to do at the very least. We wanted to take our content, we wanted to put it on our website, we wanted to put it on Facebook, we wanted to put it on Twitter. And so in 2009, when Cope was announced, it was kind of the dream come to life. You had a lot of content managers looking at this, and they were emailing this to their colleagues, and they were saying, yes, I knew this could be done. This is my problem. And they were printing these things out, because that's what we did at the time. And they were taking it down to their IT guys, and they were throwing this on the table, and they're saying, look, someone can do that. You told me it couldn't be done. These guys are doing it. I want to do that. And this is what happened when the Cope architecture was announced in 2009. So what benefits does Cope bring? These three mainly. The two are obvious and practical. The third, I think, is a little more philosophical. It gives us expansion with cost reduction and ultimately peace of mind. Simply put, we can get our content in more places. We can open up new marketing channels, new revenue models. We can reach more people. And that's awesome. As marketers, as content managers, of course we want to do this. We create content to be consumed. But you're sitting there and you're saying, well, we can do that now, though. Right? I can write an article, I can put it on my website, I can copy it into Facebook, I can copy it into Twitter. This is nothing new. But what we can do, if we have an automated strategy and we've done our content right, we set up our architecture right, we can do it with cost reduction. Because the fact is, multiple channels means rework means more dollars, and if we have high velocity content, for instance, if we are a university publishing news articles and we're pushing 3 or 4 news articles a week, that's higher velocity content. That rework costs money. And then if we change that content, we have to go back to all these channels, and we have to change it around. So what we're really looking for is we're looking for all the benefits without the drawback. We want control. We want this idea that we have our content under control. This is an actual nuclear power station control room. And I counted. There are 72 screens in here. 72 screens. This is what we want. This is the vision in our head that we have of control. We would have this one master interface where we can see everything and we can manage all of our content no matter where it comes out. Do you ever wonder why that dashboard metaphor is so popular in software? Everything has a dashboard. It doesn't actually matter what your software does, so long as you have a dashboard. I'm going to create a software company that has a dashboard that helps you manage your dashboards. It's going to be a meta dashboard company, and I'm going to make millions of dollars. This is another thing that plays great, and I sell software for a living. We show dashboards all the time. I don't know if anybody actually uses them, but we love it because dashboards give the illusion of control. With the illusion of control, especially control over our content. More than just control over our content now, I think as content managers and content editors, we really want to future-proof our content. We're thinking about what we're doing in our content now, but we're also thinking about what we need to do in the future. And I think that is born off us getting burned in the past. We can all think back to something where we did something and our IT department said, well, you can't do this because now we have to change all this stuff. We don't know what's out in the future, so we want to future-proof our content. We want to keep our options open. We want to make sure if something else happens in the future that we can keep our options open. Who was here last year? Raise your hand. Okay, I'm going to show you my favorite slide. I used it last year. I use it in about half my presentations. This is my scared cat slide. The internet has been fantastic for pictures of scared cats. I think it's one of the great innovations that the internet has really brought. These are content managers. This is what we are. We're terrified of what may happen in the future. This next one's my favorite. And then this last one, it's like you just throw up your hand. You're like, that's it, I give up. And here's a quick aside. I learned, and I'm sorry to report this, I learned that you can actually drop animated GIFs into PowerPoint. And let me tell you, that revelation almost took this presentation in a whole different direction. Because now I had the, is anyone on Reddit? Reddit? Okay, Reddit, there is a subreddit called Startled Cats. And it is a subreddit specifically for animated GIFs of cats that are scared. So I'm going to give you what I think is the greatest scared cat GIF on the internet. This is a cat on the hood of a car. As near as I can tell, it was in Sweden. This is my favorite scared cat on the internet. And there's that great moment where the cat's hanging in midair, and the cat's thinking, what the hell was that? That's what's great about animated GIFs is they just keep looping. You can just sit and watch them forever. But it could be worse because you could be this dog. That has absolutely nothing to do with the presentation. I just saw that and I could not put that in. I felt compelled. Let's just watch that a few more times because the air that he gets at the end, he's like a full gainer. That's like Olympic level diving that dog's doing there. Okay, we have to get serious again. Stick with me. Content that's bound to its channel is locked in, and this is exactly what Karen was getting up here talking to you about. If you have bound your content into a channel, if you created it and managed it in such a way that it really depends on a certain channel to be delivered, it's locked in, and that scares us. Here's the dream. This is what we want as content managers, whether we acknowledge it or not. What we're looking for is infinitely adaptable content that can shift shape or format at will forever. That's what we're looking for. It's not much to ask. This is what we're looking for as content managers. Ultimately, this comes because we want peace of mind. And that's what COPE is bringing us. The idea of separating content and presentation is giving us peace of mind about how we're managing our content now and how we're managing our content in the future. So this is awesome. COPE's great. Let's all do it. That's it. That's all I had. Go back to your organizations and implement it. It's not that simple. There are challenges. I'm going to go through a few. This is the downer part of the presentation, right? I'm going to go through some of the challenges and some of the things you have to think about when implementing COPE. There are three, really. There's a set of editorial changes that get semi-philosophical, I think, at some point. There's this idea of rendition management. And when you do this, you suddenly have to be very aware of what we call content and channel elasticity. Content and channels can be rigid or elastic, and we'll talk about what that means. Editorial changes. Since a web page will now be a single channel among many, your editors can't create content solely for that channel. Here's an example. This is from the original NPR presentation. The last sentence there says, the full poll, including the list of battleground districts, is here, and it's hyperlinked. The word here is hyperlinked. That only works on the web. That only works in a medium, in a channel that supports hyperlinks. If you're publishing to something that doesn't support hyperlinks, that's not going to make any sense. And here's an example. This is from a magazine. Click here to compare them. This is a magazine that said, well, we'll just take our web content and we'll just publish it in the magazine. It'll be great. And this is what happens. Newspapers do it too. Your banner ad's not converting on your website? Put it in your newspaper. Click here to register. And I just imagine, my dear departed late mother would probably be sitting there, and then she would call me, and she would say, I'm clicking, it won't register, it's terrible. So this is a problem when we try to reuse our content. This is content that's bound into its channel. Here's another example. So say you're editing a headline in an article, and you change the font of the last word, and you say, well, now this headline is perfect. You have a real problem. Because if that's what it takes to make that headline perfect, you can only publish that content into a channel that allows you to change the font. If you're publishing, if this is the title of your podcast and you're publishing it in iTunes, to my knowledge, iTunes does not support font changes in titles. You have a real problem. If your font, if the semantic meaning is bound up in its format, I'm not saying you can't do it. I mean, you're very artistic and you have a particular point you're trying to get at, but you have limited your options greatly if you do that. So this leads it to a question is, will your editors know and understand all the different channels where their content might be published? Right now, your editors may just be publishing web pages on your website, and that's great. They're very happy. They know what to do. They know how to do it. Are you going to be able to sit down with them and say, well, no, we're going to do all these different things, and you have to start thinking about all these different things, and we're going to publish to this one place, well, it doesn't support this, and it doesn't support this. So it becomes a training issue. Can your editors abstract themselves away from the presentational specifics of the channel? I don't know if we can do that. Here's a philosophical question. Is it possible to mass produce content without thinking about where it will be presented? Can you write a news article without any idea in your head about where or how this news article is going to come out? Can you write this news article as a perfect piece of content stripped of all formatting and presentation that just kind of floats magically in your head in this perfectly neutral space? I think that would be hard to do. Mark Bolton wrote a great article earlier this year, no, late last year. And he said this: the problem is this, the question content people ask when finishing adding content to a CMS is, how does this look? And this is not a question the CMS can answer anymore, even with a preview. How we use the web today has meant that the answer to that question is, in what? So if you create your press release and you step back and you ask somebody, how does this look? The correct response should now be, well, in what? In a browser? On my iPod? On a phone? In what? Now, vendors are cognizant of this fact. This is a screen cap from Episerver, who's also a sponsor. See what I did there? This is a web content management system that we actually sell. And this is an example of a web page that I've created just normally, and that's also my Windows taskbar. Hold on. I'm going to trust that that's going to go away at some point. So this is an example of a web page that we created as a web page in a browser. And we want to know what this looks like in another channel. So what Episerver is doing is I can go pick the channel. I can go up here and say, okay, this is great, but show me what this looks like as an iPhone vertical. Or show me what this looks like as an iPad horizontal. And the interface changes. And now I'm seeing what the content looks like in that particular channel. And what's really neat about Episerver in particular is I can edit in this interface. I can actually click a button and I can actually change my format and change it right there in the interface. So I can cycle through all the different channels where my content's going to come out and see how it looks in all these. And this leads to a point, is that the idea of how does this look really should change to how does this read? Really, the right way to preview content is to almost call somebody up on the phone and read it to them, because that's the only way to strip out the visual specifics from that content. So that's the idea of the editorial changes that we're going to have to make to embrace this concept. Second of all, we have to understand this concept of rendition management. This is like the wet blanket on the coat parade. This is the part that gets really sticky. This is the dream. Right? The dream is that we have content and it just goes unedited into all of our different channels. We have content in one place, we just effortlessly publish anywhere. It doesn't work that way. Channels impose limitations, and the fact is content often has to go through what we call renditions. So you can publish your content into your website without any changes, but if you want it on your mobile app, it has to be changed, and if you want it in social media, it has to be changed. A rendition is a version of content designed to adapt to a particular channel. Here's an example from the original screen cap I showed you. You have the teaser and the mini teaser. Those are never going to appear together in the same channel. You're never going to have those together in the same channel. The channel is going to pick from one or the other. Karen called this content packages. So a channel that has more space is going to use the larger one, with less space is going to use the smaller one. Now this is a very, very easy way to do it, but there are more complicated ways to do it. What you end up is core content rendered multiple times. And what gets hard about that is managing multiple renditions is harder than managing single pieces of content. You run into what you call an N+1 problem, where if I'm having to render content 5 times, I've got my core content, and I've got 5 different renditions, so actually I'm managing 5 different pieces of content at this point. Here's an example from the Winnie the Pooh article. This is an image that goes with this article. You see it's a very, very wide screen image. This only works in certain channels. For other channels, this image has to be cropped. Now, the problem with cropping images is not something that can be automated. It's an editorial decision. A human being has to look at this thing and decide what is artistically correct and valid. And so this is what we call a manual intervention. A human being has to go in and manually intervene in this content. Karen talked about the ideas that you create multiple crop sets, so you crop this thing multiple times. But what if you come up with a channel in the future that you don't have a correctly cropped image for? When you change content, how do we propagate manual interventions through all the different renditions? So if we're rendering our content 5 different times, we have 7 different image crops, and I change the image. Now I've got to queue up a workflow event to have this image change in every possible different channel. And at what point do manual interventions cause a rendition to become its own piece of content? If I have an article that I have to manually intervene in 13 times to make it work in a particular channel, at what point is that just another piece of content instead of being a rendition tied to the original piece of content? So rendition management, it is a manageable problem, but it can be difficult. And then finally, you have to be aware of content and channel elasticity. Content elasticity is the ability of content to adapt to a rigid channel. Channel elasticity is the ability of a channel to adapt to a rigid content. I'm giving you an example. A very elastic piece of content would be the Winnie the Pooh article in NPR's example. It has a title and a subtitle and a teaser and a mini teaser and an author and a body of text and a couple images. It's got a million different properties to it. Channels can pick and choose from these properties in order to adapt that content to their channel. The content is very elastic. A rigid piece of content would be a 5-minute video clip. What can you do with a 5-minute video clip? You need a space that's going to show video, and you need a 5-minute slot. And if your slot is now 3 minutes, that is a huge manual intervention. You could cut it off after 3 minutes, but that would be awful. You're going to have someone in go in and edit that content. A 5-minute video clip is a black box. There's no way to break it down. There's no way to break it down and take different pieces from it to make it work without an editor going in and actually manually intervening to change this content to make it fit into that channel. So that's an example of very, very rigid content. Here's an example that Karen used as well. Try creating content that's going to fit on both these screens. So I got a piece of content, and your boss comes to you and said, okay, we have one channel which is going to be a Samsung Google Gear watch. And we have another channel that's going to be a billboard on Times Square. Can you make content that's going to fit both? I don't think you can. And what's really interesting about the billboard is channel limitations aren't just technical, they're also contextual. One of the limitations of a billboard in Times Square is you really can't stop and spend a lot of time staring at it. I don't know if you've been to Times Square, but people move pretty quickly through Times Square. You could put 1,000 words on a billboard in Times Square. They would fit, they would be legible, but nobody is going to stand in Times Square and read 1,000 words. The context of the user in relationship to that channel is very, very different. So you have both technical limitations and contextual limitations. This next statement's kind of strong, but I think generating omni-channel content is virtually impossible. I think you can get close, and I think with renditions, you can do a lot of great things there, but I think if you're going to generate content that would work on every possible channel, you would have to dumb that content down so far it'd be almost unusable. So, editorial changes, managing renditions, and being aware of content and channel elasticity, those are 3 of the challenges. So we've talked about what it was, we've talked about the benefits, we've talked about the challenges. What I want to do now is have a conversation about what this means. What do we need to do? We've talked about this, we know what it is. Why do we care? When you go back to your organizations, what are you going to do with this information? I think there's a theoretical mind shift that we need to make as content managers and content editors. We need to take a theoretical leap. And I think there are 3 technical imperatives that we have to take back to our organization. There are almost 3 technical demands that we need to make. So let's start with the theoretical. We need to break up with the channel and fall in love with the message. We've had an unhealthy relationship with the channel. We are codependent on our channels. We need to break this unhealthy relationship and concentrate on our message again. Remember Aristotle? He broke things up into the logos and the lexis. The logos is our message. Our message is what we're trying to say. And I think we lose sight of that because we don't think about the message. We think about the lexis. We think about the channel. We think about how we say it. And they're 2 very, very different things. In a perfect world, channels should be interchangeable. They should be completely interchangeable. This is not a perfect world. Obviously, there are practical issues here. But the idea of the channel that message comes out, that is not the thing. The thing is the message. Let's say we manage an intranet for our company. This is our message. The north parking lot is being resurfaced tomorrow at 4 p.m. That is the message in its purest form. This is the channel. We tend to get obsessed with this. We're like, well, we're going to go make a web page. We're not going to think we're going to communicate this message. We're going to think, well, we're going to create a web page, and that's what we're going to do. So in looking at this, I sat down, I timed myself, I put my phone on the desk, and I started the timer, gave myself 60 seconds, and I thought of all the possible channels we could use to communicate this message. And this is what I came up with in 60 seconds. Give me more time, I could probably come up with more. We could communicate it verbally. I could stop you in the hallway and say, don't park in the north parking lot tomorrow. We could do physical print media. We could print off a sign and stick it on the wall. We could do digital media, so we could have an LCD panel on the wall that scrolled this message across. We could make a web page on our intranet, for sure. We could have an RSS, if people were looking at RSS feeds, we could put an item in an RSS feed. We could email it to people, we could text people. We could put it on social media, that inside that are like 12 different things. We could put it on LinkedIn or Twitter or Facebook or whatever. We could do an audio broadcast. If we had an intercom, we could announce it over the intercom. If we had a video channel, we could do a video broadcast. And then there's the Minority Report channels. You remember when Tom Cruise walked into the hallway, they're like beaming ads directly into his head? These are channels we haven't even thought of yet. But what do? We sit down and we think, well, I'm going to make a web page. So we ignore all the possible potential channels that we could get our message across, and we focus on this one channel because we have an unhealthy relationship with it. Remember the question I gave you in the very beginning. If you could publish your content every way except as a web page, what would that look like? And you ask that question to a lot of people, and they're like, well, what would I do with that? That'd be the worst CMS ever. But remember, there are all these channels. I'm only taking away one. You can have them on everything else. You just can't have them in that one channel. Our channel is not our message. We need to start managing messages, not web pages. Historically, we haven't been managing messages. We haven't been creating messages. We haven't been communicating them. We've been creating web pages. So that's a theoretical mind shift that we have to make. And I think there are 3 technical imperatives that we need to go back to organizations and demand on. We need to design for content structure. We need to value content purity. And we need to insist on content integration. How can we break our content down into reusable pieces? When we do content modeling, we do a lot of content management implementations at Blend, and we do a process called content modeling, where we look at a logical domain of content, and we kind of ask ourselves, what are all the different pieces? We ask ourselves about the MRU. What's the minimum reasonable unit? What is the smallest unit of content I can break this thing down into and still manage it reasonably? Obviously, you could break something down into every word. You could individually manage every single word. That wouldn't be reasonable. The costs would be vastly higher than the benefits. What's the minimum reasonable unit? I don't think that people think about this. They do good enough. They don't ask themselves, what might I want to do with this thing in the future? We tend to look at things like this as a holistic thing. This is a web page. It's our web page. It's awesome. But it's not a single thing. This is actually a conglomeration of multiple different elements. We have a bunch of elements that we've actually brought together to create this web page. We don't look at the elements. We tend to just look at the page. I took a press release. I just went out to IBM because I thought IBM press release, that'd be the most obvious thing. So I looked at IBM's press release. In about 10 seconds, I broke it down to like 14 different pieces. There's a million different ways you can break this down. And once you break this content down like this, you can do some amazing things. You can take these pieces and you can rearrange them to put them in other channels. I believe content should be like a salad bar. I love salad bars. My favorite thing in the world is salad bars. Salad bars are great. Because if you order an entree at a restaurant, you get everything on one plate. The chef puts it on one plate and you got to take it or leave it. If you go to a salad bar, everything's in its own little discrete units and I can pick and choose for what I want. I can create my plate the way I want to create it. I believe that the perfect representation of content is a salad bar. You want to pursue this as much as possible. Break your content down into the minimum reasonable unit that you can then rearrange and adapt to another channel. How can we keep our content free of formatting that inhibits reuse? We do this all the time. Since we're fixated on a channel, we think, I'm going to bind formatting and presentational specifics into this content because I know where this content's going to go. So that's fine. I can just put it in here. Remember this? Click here. That was something that was bound into that content, prevented that content from being reused effectively. And then we all know what this is, right? So WYSIWYG editor. These are the coolest things. You have them in your content management system. You see them, you're like, oh, I can do great. I have such freedom here. I have fonts and I have colors. And what do you end up with? You knew that it has to have Comic Sans in it somewhere, right? And a clip art of this guy going, I suck. It's fantastic. This is a disaster. If there was something in here that I wanted to pull out and reuse in another channel, I really can't. I really can't do it. There's been a huge backlash against WYSIWYG editors. A lot of people are saying don't use them, it's bad practice. And this is born over the 5 years, the channels that have really come out of the woodwork in the last 5 years. I think that you can remove or minimize most WYSIWYG with structure. I'm not saying there's not a use for WYSIWYG somewhere. I think limited, well thought out WYSIWYG editors are fine. But I think you can remove a lot of that with structure. One of the greatest things you can do to understand your content better is watch your editors use a WYSIWYG editor. Sit behind one of your editors and watch them create a piece of content. If the first thing your editor does is write a sentence at the top and bold it, that's an editor who needs a subtitle field. And you can watch them create this content. Watch what they put in there. And you can realize that you probably don't have enough structure to your content. And without that structure, they are binding things into that content that will prevent you from reusing it in the future. And finally, integration. And this sort of gets technical, and I certainly don't mean it to, but the fact is, how can we get content out of our CMS in a neutral format to power other channels? What can we do to get our content out? How can we connect our CMS to other systems? The fact is, most of our content lives and dies in the same system. We have a content management system in which we create content, and we edit content, we store content, we manage content, we deliver the content from there, we archive the content, and we delete the content. It spends its entire life locked up in that system. What can we do to get our content out of there? What integrations can we have to take content and use it in some other channel? Now, obviously, there's some technical things, a good system of content export, some kind of level of web services to get content out and programming APIs. But there are some other great integrations that you can look at after the website is built that don't require a lot of changes. And I've collected a few, both as practical examples, which are interesting, but also because this gives you an idea of the level of integration that I'm talking about, that if you have this way to get into your content, you can do some neat things. Everybody know MailChimp? Anybody use MailChimp? It's a newsletter emailing system. It's great. Did you know MailChimp can run off an RSS feed? Did you know you can point MailChimp at an RSS feed, and when you post something to that, and if you have a CMS, I can almost guarantee it will put out an RSS feed. RSS is one of kind of the oldest publication syndication technologies running in the web today. You can run MailChimp off RSS. It can automatically email stuff out when you post something to your website. Congratulations, you've just taken content and you've put it into another channel without spending a lot of money, without involving your development group. This is integration. This is integration done cheaply. Anybody know this service? If this, then that? It's like the worst name in the history. It's a terrible name. And they made it worse with a plaid logo. If you have a bad name, don't have a plaid logo. You're just inviting people to make fun of you. And it's even worse because they actually pronounce it phonetically. They say IFT. This is called IFT. It sounds like a sinus infection, right? You have a case of IFT. So IFT runs off of recipes. And here's an example of a recipe. If something is posted to an RSS feed, then post it to my Facebook page. And we actually did this. This is a website from a car club, and we posted an article, and then within 30 minutes, a beautifully formatted version of that article appears on Facebook and invites people to click on it. This is integration. This is fantastic. This is very, very low-cost, cheap, free integration without us having to involve our development group at all. These services exist. I just found this the other day. This color scheme may kill you, so if you're color sensitive, I'm sorry. Zapier. I just found this the other day. Apparently everybody knew about it but me. This is industrial strength IFT. So if you're like, well, I can't use kind of this free consumer level service, you can actually pay. This is enterprise level. And they have this idea of zaps, because everybody has to have a dumb name for it. A trigger and an action. When this thing happens, do this thing. And you can plug this deep into your systems. I promise you, you can rig this up into some event that your content management system does. And then you can do something else with it. You can say, put that content on Twitter. You text this content somewhere. You could kick off all sorts of different things. This is great surface level integration here. You can even install this. This is the cavalcade of stupid internet names, right? This is Huggin. You can actually install this. If you're sitting out here and saying, well, I can't use the service, we're the government, we have to install it. There's an open source project that lets you do this. It's an open source content integration project called Huggin. And it creates agents that go do this thing for you. This is integration. This is content integration. Dynamic PDF generation, boy, that's come a long way. It used to be hard to create a PDF. To create a PDF, you used to have to start with a Word document. So if you wanted to get this thing in print, that was complicated. It's really not anymore. We did this for one of our clients. When they post a news article, they automatically, for free, they get a full-blown printable PDF. They get a printer-friendly PDF. They also get the ebook formats. They get EPUB, the open source ebook format, and they get a Kindle device. So their article can automatically go on a Kindle. And I've heard that Kindle Direct Publishing is how you get your ebooks up into Amazon. They're opening up an API later this year, so you can automatically push books into Amazon. So you can have your content in your CMS, manage it there, and when you changed it, automatically generate a Kindle ebook and automatically update that book for sale in the Amazon marketplace. Amazon just became a channel. We can use Amazon to distribute our content. If we have people that are paying for subscriptions or something, we can now sell it on Amazon, manage it in our CMS, and automatically update it. That's awesome. Screen scraping, Kapow Technologies. For a change, it's a nice dignified name, like Kapow. They make a screen scraping system where if you can't change your website at all, what Kapow's system will go out is it will go grab your content publicly, like a public user would. And then it gives you this interface where you can click on things on your page and say, well, this is the title and this is the subtitle. You can introduce structure after the fact. So it will grab your content, let you introduce structure after the fact, and then let you do things with it. I mean, you can just take the raw data and do some development and do something magical. But there are also pre-formatted things to do. They will break your website up into pieces, translate it, and reassemble it as a website in another language and put that somewhere else on the internet for you. They will take your content, break it into pieces, and dynamically create a mobile app. So if you want to turn your website into a mobile app, if you're thinking that it's like 2010 and this is the thing to do, you want to turn your website into a mobile app, this can do it automatically for you. You change your website, you kick your little robot off again, and it'll go do this. These are surface level integrations. Content integration liberates our content. It gives us the ability to do more with our content. Remember in the beginning I said we're not doing enough with our content. We're too in love with our channels. Content integration is one of the first steps to be able to get our content into other channels. This should really be our rallying cry as content managers. Structure, purity, and integration. I think that before the after party, we're going to leave here, we're going to have the nerdiest protest march ever. We're going to go demand structure, purity, and integration. When I wanted my creative director to put this picture together, I had to find a good protest sign. And here's my problem with protesters. They don't hold their damn signs level. This is the only guy I find. This is why the Occupy Wall Street movement failed. They didn't hold their signs level, clearly. We could go all William Wallace on it. This is what we could do. And this is obviously a joke, but it's almost not. Because structure, purity, and integration, it gives you freedom. The fact is COPE, whether you implement COPE like NPR did, or you just take COPE principles back to your organization, it lets us do more with our content. We can get more value with less cost, less risk, and more control. But to do this, we need to start thinking in terms of messages, not channels. We need to design for content structure. We need to value content purity. And we need to insist on content integration. That's what I had. Thank you very much.